Someone from the subreddit Paranormal told me to post this experience here. So, here we go. I caught a lot of crap for this story in another sub, thus I removed it. But this is a personal experience, and what you read into it, yeah, that's up to you. This is a long story. Sorry. So I've been back and forth on whether or not to tell this story, mostly because it involves some aspects of my working life that I'm not at liberty to discuss, but also because it had severe personal implications for me. Anyway, I have decided to share it here, and I hope you understand why there are things I simply can't go into detail about. This all started in December 2020. As part of my education, I was scheduled for a 6-month internship at a psychiatric hospital. I had previous experience with working with these type of patients, so I was really excited about it. I switched around the 4 different wards in the hospital, so I treated a lot of different people with a lot of different problems. I was curious about all the different aspects, so I never said no to a task. Which meant I came across everything from murderers and pedophiles to suicidal teenagers with personality disorders. In my work life, I've had people spit at me, verbally and physically assault me, throw shit at me, and all that stuff. So I like to think I'm a pretty tough guy. And besides that, I always carried a personal assault alarm. One press of a button, and staff from every ward would be there in a matter of seconds. On one of the wards, I quickly noticed that there was a certain room, which is monitored 24/7 by a guard. To be clear, this is a pretty normal procedure, either because the patient is physically abusive, suicidal, or restrained. But most patients get the watch pulled off them relatively quickly. I asked a colleague, and she told me it was a female patient. Let's just call her Anne, who was extremely aggressive and psychotic beyond belief. At that point, Anne had been restrained to her bed for 3 months. I could not believe what I was hearing. We have really strict procedures when it comes to restraining people with belts. And by the way, they're soft belts made of fabric, not leather. So, restraining the patient really is the absolute last resort we go to. I asked the chief psychiatrist what was up with this girl, and he just scoffed and said, "If only I knew, but honestly, she defies logic." He told me that at first they thought she was psychotic, but her symptoms only got worse, no matter how much different medication they tried. Then they thought she might have suffered a trauma and was in a dissociative state. But that still didn't fit the profile of her symptoms. She had gone from being a perfectly normal woman in her 20s to being violent, extremely aggressive, and unable to speak in just 4 months. That is practically unheard of, especially as no drugs were involved. We regularly make a toxicology check of all patients, and always when they're admitted. One day, my alarm went off. See, they're all connected, so I know where I need to run to help my colleagues. I immediately knew it had to be Anne. And I was right. She had only had her legs and torso fixated. Again, normal procedure, if the patient otherwise is relatively calm. She had defecated in her hand and thrown it at the guard watching her. She then proceeded to bite her fingers so hard that 3 or 4, I can't remember the exact number, had really bad fractures. Both her hands were a bloody mess, and she needed like 50 stitches afterwards. It wasn't the blood or the fact that she would throw her own filth at us. I had seen that loads of times. But the screams this woman made. It was the most primal, guttural, and terrifying sounds I've ever heard. It scared me shitless. The best way I can describe it is something like a bear growling, and a mountain lion hissing and spitting, all at the same time. I have seen my fair share of people in primal distress, but I could have never imagined that a person could make sounds like that. As an intern, I am in no way allowed to use force, so I was just watching as 7 of my colleagues tried to fixate her fully to her bed. They had serious trouble pinning her down. Remind you, these are really experienced people. At last, we called a medicinal alarm, which immediately calls for a chief psychiatrist to make decisions. He decided to forcefully medicate her. They gave her 1 and then a second shot. It only seemed to piss her off, even though it should have put a bear to sleep. At the 3rd injection, she calmed enough so that they could restrain her. She never nodded off. She just breathed heavily and kept staring up at the same corner of the room, sometimes smirking at something only she could see. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was back at the ward. It was a relatively calm weekend, so there really wasn't much to do. Anne was in one of her good periods, so she had her restraints removed. A guard was always by her, though. I was sitting in the office when, suddenly, I see Anne walking in the hallway without the guard. I don't know if he had taken a bathroom break or whatever, but he wasn't around. So I caught up with her. I asked her what she was doing in the hallway alone, but of course she didn't respond. I should mention that many of my colleagues were afraid of Anne, and rightfully so. Even though everyone is aware that it's the illness and not the person attacking you. But when it keeps happening, that patient does catch some stigma. I, for one, always try to look at the person and not the illness. So I asked where we were going. She took me by the arm and led me to the common area. She went over to a book cabinet, turned and looked at me, and muttered, "Read book." I was completely taken aback by the fact that she was speaking. She pulled out a random book and handed it to me. She then sat down on the floor and started rocking back and forth. I joined her on the floor and started reading the book. It was just some random old book, probably from a charity, and it had no special meaning. But as I read, she came closer and closer to me. She then cuddled up to me, put her head on my lap, and fell asleep. One of my colleagues came by, and she looked absolutely shocked. And before I knew it, 5 or 6 people, including the chief psychiatrist, was looking at me reading this random book out to her. I caught a lot of praise for this, which is always nice. But then, things took a turn for the worse. For me, at least. It started one night when I was home alone. It was a completely normal night for me, until I heard something from upstairs, coming down the stairs. The best way to describe it is like a big dog thrashing and tumbling down the stairs. You know, like when a dog rushes down the stairs to greet you. But this was bigger. Much bigger. I could hear the weight of something tumbling down, while nails or claws, or whatever, slid on the steps. I got up, thinking that somehow there was a massive animal in my house. But there was nothing there. That scared the ever-living shit out of me. I had never had anything like that happen to me. I left the house and stayed the night with my parents. But I also had strange effects on my body. Like I had a filter over my eyes or something. Everything started to seem out of focus. Like tunnel vision, but with a massive blur added to it. And then I started to dissociate. I had this feeling of being totally out of contact with my body. Then came the panic attacks. My girlfriend called an ambulance one of the times because I was on the verge of a heart attack. The paramedics said I had a heart rate of 240 beats per minute. I have had no prior problems with my psych, but I figured it was stress. I have suffered from sleep paralysis before, but never with hallucinations or whatever you want to call it. But that started recently. I see a large black mass with long arms and legs sat in the top corner of our bedroom, like a massive spider, but just with 4 legs. This is now happening on a nightly basis. A couple of days ago, I told my girlfriend about it because she kept pestering me with questions about my nightmares. She said, "That's funny. Every time you're just about to go to sleep, you look up in that corner and you sort of smirk." That reminded me of Anne. And now I am absolutely terrified that I might have brought something home. Believe it or not, that's up to you. I have never treated a patient like Anne, and none of my colleagues had either. It was scary stuff, and I have never suffered any psychological problems before. Never. But something is going on. I am sure of it. It feels like it wants to get back at me or something. I don't know. And by the way, Anne is much better today. She is in a rehabilitating home, where she thrives. One day she might even be able to have her normal life back.
My wife heard a skinwalker in our house last night. Let me start off by saying that my wife doesn't believe in paranormal entities or anything of that nature. We have 3 cats, and one of them likes to be a rebel, jumping onto counters and meowing at the top of his lungs, just looking for attention. He does this throughout the night, and it's a regular occurrence. Last night, after a few beers and video games, I decided it was time to head to bed with my wife. When I woke up this morning, my wife was basically attached to me, with wide eyes and a nervous look on her face. I asked her what was wrong, and she proceeded to tell me what happened last night. She said that around 2:50 in the morning, she was woken up to a noise that sounded like one of our cats downstairs, meowing unusually loud. After giving herself a few seconds to perk up and fully pay attention, she says that the meows sounded more like a person trying to mimic a cat, and it kept saying, "Hello?" After meowing for 2 to 3 minutes, a loud bang came from our front door, and then a notification went off for a motion sensor at our front door. When she told me this, I checked my phone, and sure enough, there was a notification for motion detected at 2:52 a.m. I asked her why she didn't wake me up so I could grab my gun. She said she was frozen with fear and didn't want it to hear her make a noise. We're out running errands while I'm typing this, but something made me uncomfortable about her story. Last night I set the home security alarm around 9 p.m, and we didn't turn it off till we walked the dog this morning. To make things worse, we had slept with all the animals in the room and the door was closed. So whatever was in our house, or outside the front door, was not one of our animals. Obviously, the first thing that came to my mind was a skinwalker, but maybe I'm just being paranoid. I checked all the rooms in the house after I got up. I'm not sure what I could have done anyways. It's very odd that my wife was scared so badly by something she doesn't necessarily believe in. We bought this house brand new, so no one has lived here before. When I'm home alone, I do feel like I'm being watched or someone's always walking directly behind me. My wife also said that the house has given her chills since we moved in. Something is just off about it. We just got home, and I went to hang up one of my shirts in the master bedroom closet when I noticed that the board that covers the attic access has been shifted a little. When I asked my wife about it, she said she's never been up there, and the builders would have placed it back in its original place before we made the purchase. I'm genuinely anxious just thinking about what could be going on. Has anyone had an experience like this? Or similar, at least? We're going to my mother-in-law's to get some sage. My wife said burning it should keep whatever's around our house away. I didn't believe in the paranormal for years, but after tonight, I'm not so sure. Okay, so I'm not much of a person to believe in the paranormal. Never have been. But I think my experience the last 2 nights might have changed me on that one. For the past 2 nights, I've been working the overnight audit shift at the hotel I work at. I normally don't do this, but the person who normally does the weekend audit shift is so sick I had to pick it up. This involves me coming in at around 11 p.m. and staying until roughly 7 a.m. It's a simple shift. I make sure cards are put in, change the cards, print reports needed for my managers, etc. However, last night and tonight, I've been hearing some weird things and seeing things out of the corner of my eye. For instance, last night, I was delivering the receipts to one of our guests, which brought me right next to one of our handicapped accessible suites. Now, most nights we try to avoid selling that room until around 8 p.m. in order to ensure it remains available on the off chance someone requires it. Last night, it was one of those nights. I pass by that room, deliver a receipt to the room across and next to it, and suddenly I hear a woman's voice. I had my earbuds in and a song I knew well was playing, so I know it wasn't from my music. I look around and nobody is around me, as it is about 4 a.m. One of the last people to rent that room was an old lady who was staying there for about a month before her condition worsened, while her son, around 40 to 50 years old, was looking for a home to put her in. She passed at the hospital, and he came, made sure she got checked out, and took what belongings were in the room. I had never seen this lady, but since that room was one of the last places she had been prior to dying, I can only imagine that her spirit, if they do exist, is in some way tied to that room. That was all that really happened last night, besides a few larger noises that I assume were just from high winds. Moving on to tonight, I've seen things in the corner of my eye that I can't quite explain. I've been doing the laundry, watching regular show on my phone, when in the corner of my eye I'll see something a little shorter than my height, 6'2". I'll look over and it seems to dart off. Normally I'd say this is just from me being tired, but this is the most awake I've been at this time in years. Then, as I was sitting down to process payments, I hear the door handle next to me start to jiggle. I watch it intently, looking at the camera feed facing directly outward that can catch the door, and there's nobody there. I look at the door and the handle isn't moving, but it damn well sounds like it is. I shrugged it off and thought nothing of it until I went to deliver receipts for tonight. Yet again, I walk by the same door and hear the same voice as last night. Again, this threw me off as I was yet again listening to music. I decided to ignore it, and as I went down the hallway towards the stairs, I hear it call out to me and tell me not to ignore it. I turned around to see a shadow go into the door of that room, but I know for a fact that room is empty. I turn around again and started quickly going up the stairs as to not stick around in that hallway longer than I have to. I make it to the second floor, only having about 3 receipts to deliver, and I hear footsteps behind me. Has to be a man's, it's very distinct. I look around and there's nothing. I, yet again, ignore it and move on. I go and take the elevator for our final floor as the only rooms I had left were all around it. That's when I see the last shadow of tonight so far. It's just barely noticeable, out of the corner of my eye, and I don't even bother looking. But it seemed like it was going up the ladder to our roof. I delivered the last of my receipts, go back towards the elevator, and it's taking its time to open up, almost as if it was called to a different floor despite me having now only one earbud in and never hearing it move. This is more of a whatever thing. I figure the thing's just old and the motor of the door is probably just needing replacing or something. I get back into the little office area behind the front desk, and that's when I notice it. The breakfast door is wide open. I had closed it when I got there shortly after making coffee. Nobody had opened it while I was downstairs. There's no way they could have. It's directly across from the front desk, and I go up and check every so often to make sure that the computers are still working properly and don't need to be restarted. I refuse to go in there right now, or anywhere near it until I have to. I'm still at work as I type this, and I can hear footsteps on the stairs that lead to the second floor, but nobody is going up them. I'm honestly too afraid to take a look for myself, so I'm relying on the live camera footage to tell me the truth.
I stared down at the D20, tears welling in my eyes. 20. The fourth one I'd rolled. Ashan and Kayla stared at me. Their eyes were wide, filled with fear. I opened my mouth to say something, but I couldn't. Saying it would make it real, and I couldn't. It could just be a coincidence. Kayla cut in. Yeah, just last week I got 2 8s in a row, Ashan said with a nervous laugh. But we all knew what was really happening. I'd gotten lucky, and in this town, getting lucky means you're going to die. Corey Eisenberg was a physics major who lived in an off-campus apartment about a block away from us. Last year, only weeks from graduating, he died in an accident. His death could have been plucked right out of a Final Destination movie. On a bright Monday morning in April, he took the elevator downstairs. Unbeknownst to him, a rat had chewed through the elevator cable that night. As soon as he stepped inside, it would snap. That's not what killed him, though. Not even close. He only lived on the second floor. The impact wasn't bad at all. In fact, he was able to press the help button, call the fire department, and calmly tell them that he needed rescue. They dispatched someone, and everything seemed like it would be fine. Apparently, on the way down, the cable whipped around inside the shaft and got wrapped around a pipe. When the firemen got there, a rather heavy-set one stepped on the top of the elevator. It rocked back and forth, pulling the cable taut. It started spraying water. Now, I know what you're thinking. Water meets a live wire, and crack. He's gone. But no. The electrical wiring was well insulated. No. What happened was that at that very moment, the fireman started axing through the top of the elevator, and his axe got stuck. But he'd made a hole, and the water pouring from the pipe, dislodged by the elevator cable, chewed by the rat, began to leak into the elevator. Drip, drip, drip. The fireman tried to retrieve the axe, but it was stuck. One of the firewomen tried to pry the ceiling off the elevator, but it was sealed very, very well. In fact, the whole thing was sealed extremely well. So, well, none of the water leaking in could leak out. Corey Eisenberg drowned to death inside an elevator. His death came at the end of an incredible stroke of good luck. I remember reading the headlines in the university newspaper. How he'd won 10 grand playing the slots in Atlantic City. There were other things, too. Like the time he ran into a tech CEO at Starbucks and ended up getting a job offer. Never would have been there at the right time if his shower hadn't broken earlier that morning. But his good luck wasn't always so obvious. It started small. Very small. Like the balance in his checking account being $1,234.56. Or breaking the wishbone of a chicken exactly in two. Or the random number generator in a line of code popping out 3 100s in a row. Or rolling a die and getting a natural 20 every time. I stared at my reflection. My phone read 2 a.m. in big fat letters, but I couldn't sleep. Corey's death pounded through my mind, his look of terror as the water level rose, slamming his fists against the wall of the elevator, screaming for the help that was right on the other side. But he didn't have a chance. Fate, luck, chance, whatever you call it, had already marked him to die. Is that what's going to happen to me? Corey wasn't the only one. There were several bizarre deaths like this one, spanning across a few decades. In the 90s, Lyetta Montgomery burned to death after tripping over a jack-o'-lantern. She'd tripled her wealth at the horse races a week before. In the 2000s, Jen Liu was attacked by a rabid squirrel while on a hike with her family. She had just inherited the entire family business, after her brother announced he'd be moving to England with his fiancée, whom he met in a chance meeting. But they might all just be tall tales. None of these details were public. They were passed down from townspeople, from generation to generation, even with Corey. From news articles, I knew he'd died, and that he'd won at the slots. But all the other stuff about wishbones and code was hearsay. Even the details of him drowning in the elevator weren't public. Ashan told me that. I shook my head and turned the water on, splashed some water on my face. Just a ghost story, I thought, rubbing the water on my face. And I'm going to be 20 next month. Aren't I a little old for ghost stories? I reached for the towel to dry my face. My arm whacked against my phone. It fell onto the tile with a sickening crack. Damn it! I shouted, diving for it. I snatched it off the floor, praying the screen wasn't cracked. My heart stopped. The screen was cracked. But it was cracked perfectly. One solid line in the glass, running vertically from the bottom to the top. Not a single split or fracture. Cold sweat broke out of my arms. I set the phone down, my hand shaking. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know if I have months or years or days. I don't know if the legend in my town is just a tall tale, snowballing with each generation, as it's told around smoldering campfires on cold autumn nights. But I don't like my chances.